This is Understandable Politics. Hello, we continue the series of programs titled Time Has Driven Them Out. Today it's France's turn in the prolonged political crisis in Paris. Why is one of the key EU countries in turmoil? The Fifth Republic, with its scandals and issues, can easily compete with regional leaders like Berlin and London. Paris has also followed the recent trend. It drove the people to the edge and ended up without a government. For the first time in 62 years, it resigned. The Republic has been led into a dead end for years. France is exhausted by the whims of its leaders. Today we'll recall the main figures. Barnier became France's shortest-lived prime minister. Macron appointed him head of the cabinet only in September. And now it's time to pack the bags.
The person who came to power was a direct appointee of Macron and did not meet any democratic criteria that could have been used in this project. So, from the start, the people were, of course, against him. From the beginning, they said they would impeach him. So, his removal was not a surprise at all. Moreover, economic problems, of course, contributed to this. France is economically declining sharply, which can be called an economic crisis or collapse, as you wish. Demonstrations are constantly happening, and his impeachment can be seen as a logical conclusion to these events.
France hasn't seen such a rapid decline in over 60 years. If we talk about the reasons, they lie in the economy. The new prime minister decided to draft a budget that made many people's hair stand on end. Here's how it happened.
The Barnier government presented the 2025 budget plan in October. To reduce the budget deficit by 2% of GDP, the cabinet cut spending by 40 billion euros compared to last year and proposed raising taxes for large corporations and wealthy French citizens, which should bring an additional 20 billion euros to the treasury. The government promised that the tax measures would not affect the low-income population. Nevertheless, Barnier's proposed austerity measures could potentially impact areas sensitive to all population groups. In particular, the government proposed cutting healthcare spending by 3 billion euros and delaying pension inflation adjustments.
Instead of treating the economy, the prime minister prescribed it a bitter potion. Barnier decided to fix the dire financial situation at the expense of the French themselves. He planned to reduce the budget deficit by 60 billion euros by raising taxes and significantly cutting government spending. Moreover, he pushed the bill through without a parliamentary vote, which further outraged the public and politicians.
We have massive structural unemployment, and a large part of the population feels disconnected from society because they can't find work, as jobs in their fields have disappeared, along with the factories. This is a deep crisis for us, firstly. Secondly, to finance these huge social costs, the state takes loans. Our national debt already exceeds 100% of GDP and continues to grow.
As we can see, nothing new. Want to find finances? Take from ordinary people or businesses, cut social spending, and raise taxes. In the Baltics and Britain, all prime ministers lost their seats after such actions. They learned nothing from the bitter experiences of their colleagues.
France was forced to resort to an emergency budget-saving plan, partly because in June, the European Commission initiated penalty procedures against France and 6 other EU countries, including Italy and Belgium, due to excessive budget deficits. In France, the budget deficit level was estimated by the Ministry of the Interior to be approaching 6.1% of GDP, and the national debt had risen to 110% of GDP. According to EU fiscal rules, the national budget imbalance should not exceed 3% of GDP, and the national debt should not exceed 60%. Barnier promised to reduce the deficit to 5% of GDP.
Colleagues from the cabinet tried to save the failing prime minister until the end. Even such statements didn't help.
Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau, taking a hard stance, stated that if the government is dismissed, it would put France and the French in an unbearable situation. According to him, those who support the proposal for dismissal are playing Russian roulette with their future.
But it's more like Macron is playing Russian roulette, whose actions were not understood even in the summer when he dissolved the National Assembly and called for early elections. Allies were holding their heads and asking why. After all, the lower house of parliament was elected in June 2022 and could have worked peacefully for another 3 years.
After a humiliating defeat by the far right in the European elections, Emmanuel Macron shocked the country by dissolving parliament and calling for early elections. Macron took a risk, hoping to stop Marine Le Pen's party from gaining power, but his tactic might have the opposite effect. For the first time, France might get a far-right government, and Macron will remain a lame duck until the end of his presidential term.
It seems that's where things are heading. After all, the allies of the careless president managed to lose the early elections, after which France fell into a prolonged political crisis. And now Macron is also facing calls for resignation. This is increasingly heard in French society.
According to a study by L'Ablaye, over 60% of French people would support the president's resignation after the fall of the recently formed government.
France has entered an era of political instability brought about by the unbalanced president Emmanuel Macron. His gamble on early parliamentary elections split the lower house into 3 fiercely opposing blocs: a weakened center supporting the president, a left alliance, and strengthened right wing led by Marine Le Pen. Since a coalition is impossible, Macron appointed Michel Barnier as prime minister in September, tasking him with sorting out the country's tangled finances. This was not achieved.
Let's clarify, 2027 is the official end of Macron's term. The situation in the country suggests that the leader of France might leave the Elysee Palace much earlier. The government's resignation has seriously impacted French politics.
Macron was forced to accept the government's resignation, thus starting another round of political crisis in France. New elections cannot be held before July by law.
But the main disappointment for the French came at the end of the 2010s. Prosperity turned out quite differently. The ongoing political crisis, with Macron changing ministers like gloves, only worsens the burden on the French wallet.
The uncertainty has most affected French bank stocks. BNP Paribas shares fell by 11% over the year. The key insurance company AXA dropped by 5 points. We're talking about billions of dollars. Prime Minister Barnier presented a budget plan that the markets reacted to instantly. S&P downgraded France's credit rating from AAA deficit to 3% of GDP.
What is Macron doing amid the collapse? He boasts with pompous speeches about European unity and promises to continue helping Ukraine. By the way, he also allowed long-range strikes on Russia.
The resignation of the French government may slow down military aid to Ukraine, said French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu. According to him, the current aid to Ukraine is provided by supplying weapons from the French army's stock, which is replaced with new ones through budget allocations. If orders for new weapons are reduced, deliveries to Ukraine will also slow down, quotes the French minister Le Président. Moreover, the refusal to adopt the budget, which caused the government crisis, will lead to the loss of €3.3 billion allocated for the army's needs, believes Lecornu.
In the midst of such scandals, Macron's inertia is troubling. He is the leader of a large and important country for the world, but analysts explain his lack of backbone by the scandalous trail of the politician.
On November 23, 2024, Emmanuel Macron found himself in a very unpleasant situation. The politician called the leaders of Haiti idiots. This was his comment on the president's decision to suspend the government. The island nation, which has fought for independence from France for centuries, considered such a statement neo-colonial.
Macron got into trouble trying to save his rating. On December 7th, the Notre Dame Cathedral reopened after restoration. Let me remind you, a fire occurred there in 2019 and part of the grand structure was completely burned down. A month before the ceremony, Macron promised to speak there.
According to lawyer Amin El-Bahi, by allowing Macron to speak inside Notre Dame, French society is renouncing 2,000 years of Christian culture, as it allows the collapse of values. In turn, the grandson of the famous General Charles de Gaulle, Pierre, added that even French kings did not dare to encroach on the cathedral, except for a man who believes neither in God, nor in France, nor in his people.
Macron also had his share of spicy scandals.
Western social media circulated images of French President Emmanuel Macron taken during a boat trip. In them, the French leader is seen spending time with half-naked men who hug and even kiss him. The images predictably caused a scandal as Macron is a married man. Although even this is not as simple as it seems at first glance. The French president has previously been caught on camera in provocative positions with members of his own gender.
French media quickly claimed it was the work of artificial intelligence, while others disagreed. But as they say, there's no smoke without fire. Back in 2018, images of the French president with black men circulated online.
Macron thinks he's the best of the best. And so was Napoleon. He imagined didn't even ask the local bishop or his partner to place the crown on his head. He did it himself. And what do such people usually think of themselves? That I am a god, that I am a king, and that I am simply number one in all matters. Well, listen, I think in the foreseeable future we'll see a couple of interesting books and novels, and maybe some popular science books that will highlight such human material as Emmanuel Macron.
Of course, François Hollande can't compete with Macron in terms of scandal, especially with the disputes with Islamists who promised jihad to the French president. But François, as the 24th leader of the Fifth Republic, laid the groundwork for what flared up, already under Macron.
French President François Hollande found himself at the center of a financial scandal after information emerged that former Socialist Party treasurer Jean-Jacques Augier invested funds in 2 offshore companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Augier, who managed finances during Hollande's election campaign, stated in an interview with Le Monde that there was nothing illegal in his financial operations. Meanwhile, former budget minister Jérôme Cahuzac faced charges of fraud, tax evasion, and hiding income. In France, calls for a radical government shakeup are growing louder, just 10 months after Hollande came to power.
After the scandal, Hollande was called nothing less than a political corpse. He disappointed voters. The French nicknamed him Flamby. That's the name of a famous dessert.
Another detail to the portrait, Hollande is a Russophobe. He cancelled the contract with Russia for the supply of 2 Mistral-class amphibious assault ships.
He had such an aggressive policy with Russia and Belarus too, by the way, because for him it was a sign of his European identity, his policy. And so to satisfy our Polish Baltic partners and Bulgarian too. This tribute should have been given in the name of Brussels. And it was a major part of his policy.
Apparently, the White House also developed a taste for French desserts with jelly at that time. His ratings were saved by the Paris attacks, the shooting at the Bataclan concert hall where 130 people died, and the Normandy 4 meeting in Minsk. The thaw in relations between Hollande and the French didn't last long. By the 2017 elections, the politician was mired in sexual scandals. After it was revealed that the US had been eavesdropping on his entire office, the Frenchman was also nicknamed Pepe Grandpa. It became clear that there was no point in running for elections. Much has already been said about Sarkozy. His main legacy for the world is the war in Libya, which continues to this day.
The military intervention in Libya began on March 19, 2011, initiated by the French government and supported by the UK. After the UN resolution was adopted 2 days earlier, Paris and the Western coalition declared support for local rebels and launched a series of airstrikes on Tripoli.
As noted by Parisian Oman, Sarkozy made this war his own and staked his entire reputation on it. For several months, he spent hours over battle maps, constantly communicating with Libyan rebels, and his contact in their circles, publicist Bernard-Henri Lévy, who modestly presented himself to the world press as a philosopher guarding peace.
We know the outcome of the campaign. A once wealthy country lies in ruins. Gaddafi was brutally killed, but Sarkozy left a final gift from Libya's eternal leader. The French president would receive it in 2014.
Western media published an interview with Gaddafi, where he claimed to have financed Sarkozy's 2007 presidential campaign. The amount was 50 million euros. Sarkozy is mentally challenged. Only thanks to me did he become president. We gave him money that helped him win. Since then, this phrase has become proverbial.
Journalists immediately accused Sarkozy of trying to destroy a former ally to cover his tracks. Corruption schemes and sexual scandals were also uncovered. Bingo! The Euro leader was assembled in one presidential term.
He was currying favor with his wealthy friends, the oligarchs. He vacationed not in his official presidential residence. The French president has several such castles and representative houses where they can rest beautifully and fully. No, he preferred to sail on yachts, living again with his super-rich friends. So he remains in our memory as someone who came from a simple family but rose to nobility. Understand? Sarkozy's most important person was also Mr. Sarkozy.
In 2021, Sarkozy even lost a corruption trial, for which he received 3 years in prison. However, 2 of them were suspended, and the third was later cancelled. So Macron is not much different from the French political elite. Right after the no-confidence vote, Le Pen said that the Prime Minister's resignation would help protect France from a toxic budget. She accused Macron of a political crisis and promised that pressure on the president would only increase.
Against this backdrop, France is preparing for strikes in the public sector against the threat of cuts, which will close schools and affect air and rail transport. Unions have called on public servants, including teachers and air traffic controllers, to strike over specific cost-cutting measures.
Under Macron, France is indeed only moving downward. Paris has lost political agency, allowed itself to be drawn into the Ukrainian conflict, lost independence in decision-making, undermined its authority on the European stage, and lost the trust of its own population.
Meanwhile, France's economy is experiencing serious problems. The cost of borrowing for it last week, for the first time in history, practically equaled the level Greece is forced to pay due to the consequences of the debt crisis.
The echo of war, one wants to conclude with a phrase from a well-known Russian film. A war that Europe started itself at the behest of its older brother. Wars that take lives and destroy international order and law. France is going to hell, as echoed in European media. New parliamentary elections cannot be held before July. The Fifth Republic risks facing the New Year holidays without a prime minister and without a budget. Good luck!